Aloha from Waikiki. I am currently recording on a makeshift standing desk attached to the top of a fridge and a microwave on the Hawaiian island of Oahu. Now, there's an active volcano not very far away, and the world's loudest bin men outside as well. So if you hear some explosions, do not fret. It will just be the end of the world or the bins being collected. Now, before I forget, the Modern Wisdom YouTube channel is live. Very happy to say that we've nearly hit 1 million watch minutes within the space of the first month. It's absolutely crazy. The response to the Love Island podcast has been insane. Shout out to the British press for both promoting and misrepresenting what I said, but all exposure is good exposure as far as I'm concerned. The Love Island podcast is still not available on audio only, so if you want to check that out, you're going to have to head to the YouTube channel. Please hit subscribe, as it would make me very happy. Coming up soon, I have the long-awaited sequel to Jordan Wallace, Paul Warrior and Tim Briggs from Reebok CrossFit Tyneside, We Dominate Nutrition and Warrior Programming, plus the world's only happyologist, positive psychology expert, Susanna Hallinan, will be dropping in to talk about happiness and her new book. But first, on to this week's guest. Warren Cass is an author, public speaker, businessman, entrepreneur, and a specialist in influence and personal brand development. I've wanted to get him on the podcast for well over a year now. From before I even started, I knew that I wanted to get him on. I picked up his book, Influence, which will be linked in the show notes below, along with all of the partner companion stuff that he gives away for free on his website. I think to one degree or another, everybody requires influence in their lives. They need to be able to control how their personal brand comes across, and they need to be able to communicate effectively. Now, this isn't just about being a go-getter, chasing after the next big job or whatever it might be. This could just be being a better partner, being a better parent, being a better whatever. You need to be able to communicate effectively. You need to be able to control how your personal brand is projected out into the world. What is the sort of example that you are setting? What are the sort of things that other people professionally, personally say about you when you're not around? What is the kind of influence that you are having on your circles? Now, Warren takes us through a step-by-step personal brand and influence MOT. If you are someone who wants to improve their ability to communicate online or in person, their access to networks, their ability to influence others in a positive way, if you've always wanted to understand how neurolinguistic programming works, even if you've always wanted to know what people's eyes looking in different directions during a conversation means, we go through it all. So get your pen and paper out. Make sure that you're ready. Here we go. Warren Cass on influence. Mr. Warren Cass, welcome to Modern Wisdom.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Great to be here.
How are you today?
Bloody marvellous. I've had a really, really busy month. I've got a couple of days in the office, which just, catching up time. So, yeah, really good. Thank you.
Fantastic. A little bit of time to reset.
Yeah, you need it every now and then, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's been a difficulty in getting hold of you, but I think that's a testament to how much you're in demand at the moment, speaking about the topics that you do.
Yeah, it's very flattering. But, obviously we're here to talk about influence today. And as somebody like yourself who builds a personal brand, the bigger the brand gets, the more in demand you get. And it's all good. Yeah,
it becomes a bit circular, doesn't it? So you've touched on the word of the day there. Can you define what influence means to you?
Yeah, in very, very simple terms. It's a broad topic, but in very simple terms, for me, it's about affecting an outcome without having to force it. Without having to force it also means, of course, without having to manipulate. Yeah. We live in a world where we're bombarded every single day with so many messages, and some of it is misinformation and some of it's manipulation. But coming back to my definition of influence is really when you can forward an idea or agenda without having to force it, with people coming along because they want to, they've been inspired to. That's how I like to define influence.
I understand. So I picked up Influence, the book, around about a year ago, and was on a flight out to America, wanted to get something that I could read on the way out, and it immediately stood out to me. Exactly as you said, we increasingly now in the modern world, almost everybody to one degree or another is building a personal brand. You know, the advent of social media means that everyone treats their Instagram or Twitter account to varying degrees of professionality like a traditional advertising medium. It's advertising for themselves. Whatever the goal is can change, but I do think that the hype to a degree about someone's own life gets proliferated by them. And upon reading it, there was a few bits which the event managers who work for my company will hate hearing over the airways, as I won't shut up about it in the office sometimes. But serendipity is not a strategy for me. Just sits it completely chopped at the knees so many of the fortunate situations that you get into, and you can sometimes kid yourself, have come about due to some preparedness that you deep down know that you didn't do, or some connection which was done by pure chance. The serendipity is not a strategy can be should be written on the wall at some points. I think it reminds me that we need to be prepared, and that we need to cover all of the potential avenues moving forward as we try to create a personal brand. So can you tell us why you wrote the book?
Yeah, I'll start by apologising to your colleagues, though, if you're quoting me all the time.
The Warren Cass rhetoric gets pushed hard in the Voodoo Events office, I'm afraid.
And you know what? The serendipity's been really, really kind to me. It has. I can't complain at all. But I've always had the best results when I've done things on purpose, on and with purpose, I might say. So I totally agree. Why did I write the book? Well, first of all, I've been speaking on the subject for well over a decade, and I wrote the book initially because I had two publishers come to me and say, "Would you write a book?" And I thought, oh, okay, I've always avoided this in the past because I've got I'm a big listener to podcasts. I subscribe to yours, amongst others, and knowledge, is a really important thing. I think every day is a school day, so it's important to continuously learn. But I do think about most business books is that they're typically written by academics who decide to give too many examples where one or two would have done, and I believe also most business books can be summarized in, a few pages rather than necessarily needing to take everything on. And I was really trying to think hard about what am I going to add value to this topic in a book format, bearing in mind there are some classic books on this subject out there. And for example, in our pre-chat, you were talking about Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, probably the oldest and biggest selling book on that topic.
Yeah.
But it was written in the 1930s. You've got The Psychology of Persuasion by Cialdini, a brilliant book, written in the 1980s. And he has done some work since, but there was a gap. And what's happened is we've had this explosion of population, of technology since then, and it's fundamentally changed everything that we do. It's changed the way we communicate, it's changed the way we access products and services, it's changed the way we consume. And so the world has changed, and we, for me, it was the thing I'd been evangelizing on stage about, and I thought, what, this is the angle I'm going to take. This is the way I'm going to write the book.
To bring those things up to speed, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Well,
take all of those proved, tried and tested concepts, but actually make them relatable to a whole new generation of
applicable to the changed world as well. I think definitely if you read David Allen's Getting Things Done, it almost becomes laborious to convert. So he talks about like using filofaxes and pages and like in trays and out trays and stuff like that. And you think, I've actually got to do a fair bit of the work. This self-help book requires me to do quite a lot of self-help to get the book to work for me, because it's so behind the times with what it would be. It would be an app now. It would be a integration like Evernote or something like that. It would be productivity tools and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, you're very right. I think as the rate of change speeds up in the world, the body of knowledge around core concepts needs to keep up.
100%, or at least its application. Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. So can you talk about why influence is important? Does everybody have it?
Knowingly or unknowingly, the vast majority of us have it, and should be aware of it if we want things to happen in our lives. That's the simple fact of it. I often start my talks with defining the fact that we're all influenced every single day from the moment we get up in the morning. Our partner's expression or the mood they're in can dictate our day.
Yeah.
The micro expression of somebody on your commute to work, whether it's a tube, train or car, can dictate your mood for the day. It's been absolutely proven that because we're such empathetic creatures, if we witness an act of kindness for the 2 hours that follow, we are more kind. So we are sponges and we absorb, and that's just the human interactions. When you start factoring marketing messaging and media, you've got a whole different layer of influence there too. So the bit I maintain is that that if you understand how you're received when you talk, when you communicate, if you understand how that comes across to others, you've got a better chance of being more effective in that communication. If you understand how you receive information and how other people influence you, you've got a better chance of having better responses to that influence. So ultimately, if you're an ambitious person, you want to evolve your career, or even if you just want to improve your relationship with your wife, husband, children, colleagues, friends, understanding influence is in your best interest.
So it's giving you some perspective of what you're receiving and what you're sending to a degree.
Yeah, and all communication really should start with an awareness of how it's being said, what's being said, because we communicate on so many different levels, don't we? So just increasing your awareness will make you more effective straight away.
Where do you tend to start with people if you were to do an influence overhaul? If you were to take me in for an influence MOT, where would you start?
Well, having seen your profile, Chris, you're not doing too bad, my friend.
Okay.
It really starts with finding out objectives. I wouldn't dream to think that everybody wants the same thing. So, the very first thing I'd do is try and understand their what and their why. What is it they want to do? What is it they want to be known for? And why is that important to them? Why is that something that's going to inspire and motivate others if that's the way they're going to come about it? So that would be absolutely the first step, is just to understand people's objectives. Without that, you can't put any real strategy into place.
If you don't have a target to aim at, you'll always miss, right?
That's the point. If you're coming at this from with an outcome in mind, but of course some people just want to be nicer and more effective in their communication. There might not be an objective. You could be retired and want to communicate better. That's fine. But if the premise you gave me was an overhaul, so coming in and maybe working with somebody, I'd be first looking to understand what it is they're looking to do. And the reason, of course, for that is that once you understand your marketplace, who you're looking to get out there, and you then need to identify your audience, where they play, the type of information they consume, the type of people that are already influencing them. So who are the potential collaborators and people that you might be able to take advantage of some of the principles I talk about in the book, like credibility by association.
Yes.
So there's a whole load of things that you might want to do once you're clear on why you want to do it.
So we've established people's why. We've started to understand their objectives and what they want to do moving forward. I think that is a massive stumbling block, especially one of the biggest routes to procrastination is perfectionism. It sounds quite strange and quite circular, but it genuinely is, that waiting until you have everything in place or everything feels perfect is a really good excuse for procrastinating on getting started on a project.
And of course, that can have a negative impact on influence as well. And I'm talking from personal experience here. My reason for procrastination is very, very aligned with what you just said. It's mainly because I like to do the job myself, because I know I'll do it the way I want it done.
You'll get it done right, yeah. If you want a job doing right.
Of course, but then what happens is work and life and everything else gets in the way, and you're suddenly overwhelmed with jobs and you don't get round to it. And of course, having somebody else do it 80% to the standard that you would have done it is better than not getting done at all. So 100%. there's a whole lot of things around that. But
agreed, yeah. You need to, I think especially in business, doubling down on your strengths. I said this in episode 8 with Michael Caju, who's the CEO of Brute Strength Training. And he said himself his route to becoming one of the biggest CrossFit programming operations in the world was by doubling down on his strengths and employing people who could fill in where he's less capable or less passionate. And I think being a jack of all trades is really no use to anybody in a business context. So you've got me in. We've had a look at my objectives. We've got around the fact that I'm a perfectionist and that I need to get moving. Where do you go next?
So from an influence strategy point of view, the first thing I would do is sit down and, based on what you've told me, identify your audience. And a lot of people forget this, but that's a bit more complex than we think, because we're living in times where there are 5 different generations in the workplace, all with this, and that's never been the case before. So we've got 5 different generations in the workplace, all with different unique experiences. And so identifying your audience is important, because we're more multicultural than we've ever been before. We're generationally divided, and we've never been before. And that affects all sorts of things like attitudes. I mean, let me give you some examples of why identifying your audience properly is important.
Definitely.
And I'm going to make one point at the end of it, but I'm sure, like me, you are tired of the term millennial.
Yeah.
Well, I think everybody's sick to death of the term millennial, but I do think it's important for older generations to understand what makes millennials tick. I think it's equally important for millennials to try and understand why and I'm not a millennial, why we have a different perspective too. And this comes down to our experiences. So a couple of quick stats to throw out at you. The average age for marriage, mortgage, and kids in the 70s was 23 years old. And today that's more like 36 years old.
Wow.
So there's a load of changes.
So what you're saying is that I've actually still got time, and that my business partner can stop applying pressure to me.
Of course, absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying. And some of those reasons, by the way, will be financial, and because actually we have more. We're more experiential now. So we have the world is our lobster, Rodney. We can go anywhere. We can do anything we want to do. So we tend to put off some of the other bigger decisions, because while we're young, we want to have those experiences. That's one. Student debt is another. There's a load of reasons why those things happen. So that's just marriage, mortgage, and kids. Beyond that, work. So in the US, only 7% of millennials work for Fortune 500 companies. And that's mainly because millennials who are of an age ready to work want to be inspired by what they do. So they either start their own businesses where they're connected to their why, or they go and work for smaller organizations where they're working directly with the entrepreneur behind the business, so they can feel like they're making a difference. So that's important to a generation. And then, you look into things like politics. And we live in an age of great misinformation, yeah. where we're as divided as we've ever been. There's a whole load of reasons for that, and we can go into that if you want to, or we can avoid it like the plague.
I'm happy for us to open up whatever Pandora's box we go into today is absolutely fine, Warren.
No problem. So, the thing about an age of misinformation is it makes actually all of us that little bit more skeptical. So, when we're told things, our first instincts now should be to not believe it until we've actually seen evidence or facts or something to support it. Social media absolutely dominates what we do. It's democratized, conversations really, and it's made every opinion have its microphone. So we have to be careful of what we take in and believe. And consumerism has changed. Again, millennials. In fact, just coming to this point, the term millennial is quite often accepted to anybody after 1980. So it's 38 years and younger at the time of recording this.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's happened since 1980 is the world population has doubled. So we're now over 7 billion people on the planet, and that's doubled in the last 38 years, which actually should scare the shit out of anybody listening. It really, really should. But that means half the world population are in
millennials, yeah.
Or millennials, yeah. And so it's now the most dominant consumer group online. From a consumerism point of view, less brand loyal. If a brand they were using every single day disappears tomorrow, that's fine. They'll move on to the next one, but it'd be largely based on things like social proof. So your reputation matters. That's why we read the reviews on Google, on Amazon, on TripAdvisor, profile testimonials on LinkedIn, etc. We're interested in this stuff because we want social proof. We want to make the best decision based on what our peers recommend. It's the way it works. So we've got all of that going on, and then we've got diversity with multiculturalism. Even faith is changing. In the UK, we're becoming more and more atheist. In some European countries, it's almost totally atheist.
Yeah.
And even in the US now, I think I read somewhere earlier this year that it's less than 50% now that class themselves as white Christian in the US, which is, it was never that. It was always such a dominant demographic.
Absolutely.
So the big point I kind of want to make with this little talk around millennials and diversity is that if you're talking to multiple demographics, if you're marketing to multiple demographics, but only using one tone of voice with your communication, the harsh reality is you're not speaking to everyone. So if we want to be able to reach different audiences and talk to different demographics, we have to understand, personalize, and produce content and add value in the way that's meaningful to the people you're trying to talk to. And so many big brands are still talking with one tone of voice. I find it utterly surprising. Technology enables us to personalize. I've got one friend who shall remain nameless, but he has a business operating from London, and he works in a particular niche. But he identified within his database recently that the database had grown quite large, and that there were something like 400 Johns, for argument's sake, on a name.
Oh, wow.
So he took a whiteboard and he wrote on video, he wrote, "Hi, John." And then he said, "Hi, John. Just wanted to tell you about," and then went on to speak to that particular audience. Now, every single John who received that believed that was written just for them and tried to figure out, but they watched the video and maybe bought the product.
Yeah.
He then moved on to the next biggest name on his list, which was, whatever it was, and then went and produced something for them. So what he identified was, by just re-recording that one video a number of times, he still had quite a big reach, but a much bigger conversion rate.
The sense of affinity was through the roof, right?
Absolutely, it was personalized.
So you need to gear the message to the market, I think.
So understand your audience is you're asking the step. We're in this consultative stage. We've come in, we've found out your what and your why. Understand your audience, or your audiences. It could be plural. It could be more than one niche you're looking to operate in. So understanding that is the first thing, and then absolutely understanding where they play.
So does that mean in terms of media?
Media consumption, events they might attend,
avenues of access, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. Points to connect.
Yep. Okay.
So that would be the next step. The next step after that, I would then be looking at all of the people who already have influence over that audience. And I'd been very simply making friends, maybe asking them to guest post on a blog, maybe interviewing them for a podcast,
Yeah.
Reaching out to other influencers. First of all, it's flattering. They're going to get some profile. It's a win-win there. They're going to let their audience listen to or read your content. So you get the credibility by association thing that comes. And then what you're doing is you're slowly building your audience and building your influence towards that audience. Because the only real thing I think nowadays is of long-term strategy when it comes to building influence is to actually genuinely try and add value
to the
audience you serve. And that could be from great content, but you really genuinely have to try and add value to the audience you serve.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've got an upcoming live stream that I'm going to do on Instagram. Maybe tomorrow when I'm driving. I'm going down to Shropshire tomorrow, and it's talking about people who have a massive platform online and are choosing to use it for reasons which add absolutely zero value as far as I can see. And the analogy that I'm going to draw is that in the same way as a strong person needs to protect the weak because it's a duty, they have a particular skill or a particular they have a particular attribute which is a travesty to not use when it's called upon. If you have a platform and if you are looked up to and if you are held in a position of credibility, which is increasingly being bestowed on people who probably don't deserve it, and you're not using it to add value and to make people's lives better, as far as I'm concerned, it's a bit of a catastrophe and it's a real wasted resource. And it shows just how little you do care for the audience that you've got. And that's not for me to say like I'm, with my small following, bestowing words of wisdom or something like that. But I'm trying to do my best to speak forth something of value, something that the people that follow me and that follow my friends and, introduce them to interesting people like yourself that will enrich their lives and help them make good lives better and bad lives less bad. That seems great. But yeah, the prospect of having a platform and not using it to me is sacrilege, I think.
So I'm often asked how do I define a good speaker? And let's just assume the given is that they know what they're talking about,
which is probably not a very good given sometimes.
Well, let's just for the point I'm going to make, make it given. So there are two things which, in my experience, the best speakers I've ever met have, and the first thing is an ego. And I know that's going to sound negative, and it is to a certain extent. But if you're the type of person, Chris, I've seen your Instagram account. You clearly care about what you're doing, but there's clearly an ego in there as well, right? Mm-hmm. So having an ego isn't a bad thing as long as our desire to add value and serve our audience is higher and bigger than our ego.
It's a very interesting point.
So the best speakers I know stand up, get a real thrill from standing up on stage. Absolutely, they do. But their desire to affect change in others is bigger than their ego.
Mm.
Now think of some world politicians right now, mention no names.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be amazing if they leveraged the platform that's come from their notoriety and everything that they do, because their desire to affect change in others and add value was bigger than their ego? What a difference that would make.
Wow, the point that you've missed there is that you're presuming that they know what they're talking about.
That's a very good point. Touche, my friend.
So, yes, we've talked about the avenues of access to the audience that we've defined. We've looked at our why. Where are we going to next?
So the next stage I would go to, we've added value, we're collaborating with other influencers, so we're starting to really build our reach.
Oh, sorry to interject, the credibility by association thing, which you touched on earlier on, I really enjoyed in the book. I think you're totally correct. When you see someone who you follow, how many times do you go out and listen to a Joe Rogan podcast? Matthew Walker, who wrote Why We Sleep, I'd seen Why We Sleep advertised on Amazon. It had been pinged to me off my Kindle on my email, but I listened to him on Joe Rogan for 3 hours. Obviously, in and of himself, he was very charming and added a lot of value, but also the platform that Joe Rogan gave him allowed me to be exposed to him, lended more credence, more credibility to what he was saying. And I bought the book while I was listening to him. So
there's a whole load of kind of cliches on we're known by the company we keep, or we are the kind of net product of the 5 people we hang around the most with. There's all of those ones which people know.
Do they ring true for you?
They not. If I'm going to be really strict, yes, we are known by the company we keep, absolutely, positively and negatively. But the whole five people that we hang around the most with, I think, is nonsense. Of course, networks aren't restricted to 5 people.
Yeah.
We know lots and lots and lots of people, and in different contexts, we'll hang around with different people. If I'm like the comedy course I went on to the other week, there's a WhatsApp group now of a whole load of budding comedians having fun. That's got nothing to do with my work. It's got very little to do with my home life or my friends, actually. So we live in pockets of interests. And we build communities within our pockets of interest, and hopefully, we're multi-layered human beings with lots of interests.
You try and take the best from everyone, right?
Yeah. Do you know what? Even a lovely thing. I mean, I'm a mid-40s guy, right? So I'm 45 years old. I'm 46 this year, and the speaking is one of the things I'm passionate about. This last month, I managed to speak up for a client in Glasgow, and what was really lovely is that. My dirty little secret is for the last 14 years I've been an Xbox fanatic. I managed to avoid it while I was building a technology business in the 90s, and my wife and kids bought me an Xbox for my birthday, which was a really fatal thing to do. Call of Duty being my game of choice.
Okay.
Of course, what happens is you start to make friends and build a clan, and that happened anyway. I got up to Glasgow for this speaking event, and really brilliantly, I managed to meet up with some of my clan and go out for a few beers and have a bit of fun. Now, some of these people I've known really well for over 12 years, but have never met face to face.
AFK, as it's known, away from keyboard.
Absolutely, yeah. So but as I say, it doesn't really matter how we connect with others. It just matters that we do connect with others, and
I think there's definitely there's a lot to be said about. We recently did a podcast on confidence, and one of the things that I tried to take away from that was talking about being truthful and being vulnerable to a degree. And I think that making a genuine connection, or committing to making a genuine connection, even if it's only mostly going to be one way, the majority of social media is you speaking and then some responses. There's more of you speaking than there are responses for most people online. But for you to add value, personally, I think that there has to be a level of vulnerability, because presuming that you genuinely care about what it is that you're talking about, you have to be very honest and very open and very truthful with it. That doesn't mean that you have to be completely transparent, but it does mean that you have to allow people to see a very true side of you. And I think that can probably be quite daunting for a lot of people who are concerned that their audience might not like what they hear.
Well, it's also daunting because it's not the way we're being socially conditioned right now. If you think about it, social media is people's highlight show reel. It's not real life. But actually, you think about the biggest connections you've ever had with somebody, it's where you've actually been vulnerable, or utterly honest and human. That's where we connect.
It's an incredibly endearing trait.
Well, even as a speaker, one of the biggest weapons I'll use on stage is self-deprecation. I'm quite happy to take the mick out of myself. It really doesn't bother me at all. But it does relax an audience, because suddenly they're not thinking they're listening to some know-it-all on stage. It's a human being just sharing the story, and that's the way it should be.
Very British characteristic as well.
Coming back to the credibility by association, though, because you mentioned one of the stories in the book, and actually, just so this lands with your audience, there's a couple of quick stories I'll tell. One from the book and one that isn't. But for me, it comes back to this term about understanding the power that somebody who already has profile, either endorsing you or taking you under the wing or being seen with you, the power that can have. So the story I talk about in the book is a personal development speaker, author, and actually to a certain extent mentor to me when I was younger, as a guy called Jack Black.
Not the
And
Jack Black.
not the Hollywood Jack Black, and a Glaswegian Jack Black who built a brand called Mindstor. So it's all about kind of personality and personal development. He was a social worker in the 80s, and he was fascinated by personal development himself. So he started developing his own content. And when he was ready to launch his own business, he saw the concept of credibility by association. He may not have called it that, but he borrowed £10,000 and he put Sir John Harvey Jones on stage next to him in front of 2,000 Glaswegian business owners at a conference or an event he was running, because he understood that Sir John Harvey Jones would be the draw. But then the moment he's on stage and he's on stage with him, he gets the credibility that comes with that. And overnight, he was the business guru that works with Sir John Harvey Jones. As a result, built a really good, powerful business.
Yeah.
You may have heard the name Judy Nake, who sold her business for 75 million. She didn't even develop the product, but she had the distribution rights to the Saint-Tropez tanning stuff.
Heard of that.
And yeah, so for her, she's quite an inspirational businesswoman anyway, because of the way she dealt with people. But she attributes a lot of her success to having somebody like Victoria Beckham walking out of the store with a clear plastic bag and her product in the bag. And when I heard her story, it was within the months that followed, she did about 2 million in sales just because of that one media appearance.
Wow.
So that whole credibility by association thing can be really, really powerful, but can be used. It doesn't. We're talking about big things here, like a 75 million sale. How does that apply to a florist working in a town centre, or somebody who just has an aspiration for a local business and doesn't necessarily want to take it any bigger? For them, it's really about identifying the influencers locally. If you want more people to know you locally, try and find the people who have sway, who make recommendations day in, day out. Who are the networkers? Who are the people that you can build relationships with over coffee just locally because they're approachable? These are simple principles or concepts, and they can be applied at whatever level or whatever level of aspiration you have for your business.
I understand. I think what we're obviously skirting around here to a degree is the very overused term now of influencers, mostly used for social media. The number of product endorsements that you get now is leveraging this exact credibility by association, isn't it? You look at, for most of the listeners, Boohoo.com and ASOS and Topman and even Giacomo and people like that are trying to rebrand themselves by attaching themselves to people like Freddie Flintoff. And do you know what I mean? Like they are, this credibility by association has become a major industry in and of itself.
It has, but it's not necessarily new. I know influencer marketing is a more recent term, but I remember over a decade ago when BlackBerry were one of the dominant brands in mobile phones, and they had they called it their ambassador scheme, but it was just influencer marketing. They identified people who were prominent in loads of different niches. I was one of them in the small business sector because at the time I was running a large business network. It meant every month I got them the next new shiny phone as long as I shared it, wrote about it, et cetera, et cetera. So I was one of the ambassadors amongst other people. But that for me was when I started to really notice that, this was a principle that could be leveraged by anybody really.
So by trying to get some credibility by association here, how can we access these people? Obviously by virtue of them being in a position of existing influence or potentially either a different or a higher level of access to network than we have. What are the effective ways that someone can go about enticing somebody in terms of contact, or if they're meeting them face to face, what can they do to make them have more confidence in the pitch, so to speak, to become associated?
Yeah, so this is a good question. It's one I'm often asked because, of course, nobody wants to go reach out to somebody who's got sway and influence and immediately be asking for something. That's the surest far way to turn them off and get them to ignore everything that you do. So, most people want to understand what makes you tick, your values, your intentions before they're going to invest any time into you. So that's the first thing. I used to sell sponsorship. So, with our business network brand, we managed to attract really nice sponsorship figures from brands like Santander, BlackBerry, O2, Microsoft, etc. And you don't attract those brands unless there's something in it for them. And so you always lead with what's in it for them. And I think this is the principle as well when you're approaching people within your network. It's seeking to add value first. So, for example, if I'd already started to build an audience and I wanted to attract the attention of an influencer, I'd probably invite them to be interviewed. They're probably going to want to, at some level, share their message. They're going to be flattered by the invitation. It's no different from you inviting me onto this podcast, Chris. It's nice to reach a different audience. That works. The whole principle of credibility by association is at play here, by the way. Because I'm sure you'll enjoy it when I share the podcast with my audience, because that broadens yours. And you've already got an audience which might be a different demographic than I normally talk to. So, we both win from it. We're both getting the credibility by association from the conversation, as long as, of course, we're both not coming across as morons, which I choose to believe we're not.
Yeah.
So, approaching somebody, I would seek to add value first. I would avoid asking for anything. I would seek to add value. I would avoid asking for anything that's not in their interests, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I understand.
That's a good starting point. So, and then of course, once you've started that, there's two things I would add to this journey of influence that we started on, because we've got assume you know your what and why, understand who your audience is, identify the influences in the marketplace, add value and collaborate. And I would then say there's only really two more steps to this. From an influence strategy point of view. Of course, we can go into lots more detail on any of those things, but as a broad strategy, one is then to continue to build your reach, and preferably on your own platform. So we rely so heavily on the platforms that are readily available to us, like YouTube and Facebook and what have you. But it's quite turbulent. They are changing, and because some of the personal brands out there have become a little bit more controversial. They're being deplatformed. So
Milo Yiannopoulos is now off Twitter, and
he's been off Twitter for some time, but actually, he was deplatformed not just from Twitter, but things like Breitbart too. So the crowd can have that impact. So it's important for you to own your own platform or to own your reach, own your relationship with your audience, rather than rely on somebody else, would be my advice.
Interesting interjection here. I don't know whether you follow much of what Tim Ferriss does.
Yes.
But, he is number one advocate of email lists, that he pushes everybody, he maximizes, and he sings the exact same hymn sheet that you are, about the algorithm on Facebook can change and there's nothing that you can do about it. The reach on YouTube, so on and so forth, everything is mediated by this third party. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's such a big advocate of maximizing email subscription and email sign up, because it is a direct line of communication from him to his audience.
100%. And actually, it's not just restricted to things like that. I read somewhere recently that Google's about to change their algorithms yet again. So it's not, you can have done as much as you wanted to with SEO in the past, but it's not necessarily going to help you moving forward. It's going to be weighted in different ways. So it's these are things that you constantly have to keep on top of, but owning your relationship with your audience is massively important.
How else can someone ensure that they own the relationship with their audience, or own their platform, as you put it?
So specifically, to answer that question, I would be, wherever possible, taking them away from the places that you met them in the first place and building that subscription. So what Tim does is he'll go and play on social media. He has lots of referral schemes in place, so he relies on his audience to help him build his audience too. But he will give you something of value, but in order to get that something of value, you're subscribing. So it could be a 10 top tips on how to whatever, but you part with your email address, and then he makes it very clear, I'm going to send you something of value on a regular basis. If you don't want that thing of value, then adios, no problem. But if you do, then know why you're doing this. It's not me spamming. I'm sending you something of value.
Yeah.
So, it's being really clear with intentions. And, the point is that all of the hard work should have been done before that stage. The people that you're talking to should understand your values. They should understand the value you bring to them. And therefore, when they subscribe, it's a consensual act.
They've got a feeling of certainty and safety that they're buying into something that they value.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
and then the last step I would take beyond continuing to build your reach and own your platform would be to productize, take advantage of what you've built, productize, then rinse and repeat. All of those steps, you can continuously go through them, and you should be on a regular basis as the world changes around you, revisiting your what and your why, and how your audience is changing, and therefore where are they playing now, what's the change in technology or social media that they've moved on to. Who are the new influencers, who can you give a helping hand to, who might be bringing a new audience with them. Add value, collaborate, continue to build your reach, productize, rinse and repeat.
I think what I like about that particular layout is that the productize comes at the end, and the operating a freemium model or over delivering on the front end, as it's known in the online marketing world, is a commonly used approach now. And as you say, exactly right with Tim Ferriss, what you get an awful lot of value for a very little investment, i.e. something that's free. You're giving your email across, but the content that you get is very, very highly valued, and that the productizing or the turning that into a financial or business, in quotation marks, plan almost becomes, it emerges organically out of all of the steps that you've built upon, that you've got this level of credibility, that you have good access to market, that you understand the audience that you're speaking to.
Yeah. And so whilst productize is the end in that simple model, actually the reality is you do all of those things all at the same time.
Yeah.
It's nice and easy to sort of spell it out in steps, but of course, if you've got a product and service to sell, you're going to sell it to the audience that you've got at the time you start, really. But you're right. The considerations up until the point of productize and selling something is making sure that you've got something that's truly of value, and it's a consensual act, that your audience want it. But no, it's a very simple philosophy on the whole thing. I mean, as I say, the world has changed. Influence has changed massively. What most people perceive to be the change might just be societal, but actually we've had changes in how technology's impacted business. It's a nice little stat that over 40% of the companies at the top of the Fortune 500 in the year 2000 were no longer there in the year 2010.
Is that true?
That's true.
God.
And even on top of that, you've got brands that have come from nowhere, which we've all heard of and know of, like the Ubers and the Airbnbs, who have come from nowhere, worth absolute fortunes, but don't necessarily own the product or service. They own the access to the product or service, so they have the influence over the audience. Uber's the biggest fleet of cars in the world. They don't own a car.
Yeah.
Airbnb is the biggest portfolio of property in the world. They don't own a property.
I think Alibaba's the same, but for retail.
Yeah, sure. And Amazon the same for retail as well. It's the people who own the relationship with the customer, with the audience, and of course they're their own platforms. They've built their own platforms.
They own their own platform, yeah.
And they own the relationship. So, that's absolutely telling. And, there's the opposite is true. I mean, think of brands that should have done it. I mean, Yell.com or Yellow Pages.
Yeah.
Yell.com are actually doing some really quite good stuff now around small business marketing, websites, SEO, and all of that type of thing. They are doing some good things, but actually, considering they started in 1956,
a little bit ahead of everyone else.
Well, in Brighton, they started with the Yellow Pages. They suddenly grew. They eventually grew onto 4 continents, and they dominated search. And the internet came along, and there was nobody saying, how's this internet thing going to affect our business? They should have been Google.
But they weren't. Blockbuster, the same.
Blockbuster, very similar. Kodak, very similar. Kodak actually invented the digital camera, the thing that we all walk around with in our pockets and just call a phone, but it's an Oracle multi-purpose device. They invented the digital camera. They even brought futurists into their business in the 80s and said, what's the future of digital, or what's the future of photography? And of course they said the future's digital, and they said that's not what we wanted to hear. You're fired.
I didn't want that. Yeah.
So that there was a load of people that are really close-minded to the change that's happening all around them. But it's not just technology that's changed. In fact, one of the examples I use on stage, I'll give you it now. There's a barometer for how long it takes a product or service to reach 50 million users. Okay, so for the telephone, it was 75 years. For the radio, it was 38 years. For the TV, it was 13 years. The iPod did it in 4. The internet did it in 3. Facebook did it in 2. The iPhone did it in 3 months. Now, if you think about it, every single one of those is an innovation in communication. It's an innovation in the way that we communicate and influence. It's a different broadcast medium. And just to evidence the 3 months it took the iPhone, it took Angry Birds 30 days. So that's the kind of the speed of change as it happens.
Yeah, I think it's terrifying, isn't it? And I suppose that it almost becomes each of those levels of communication and how open global communication is now permits this to catalyze itself further. It'll only mean that this gets further expedited and that these timeframes are going to become even more shortened because you can find out about something so much more quickly than you ever could before.
Or not. You can find out the falsehood. That's the
disinformation comes on the other side.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I wanted to talk about personal brands and how people display themselves both online and in person. I know you in the book you touch on ways to dress, colors, and how they elicit different emotions in different sort of ties and outfits, neurolinguistic programming, body language. Let's start with how you can make a good impression face to face. I know a lot of people, when we talk about influence, may be thinking about what happens online, and that may be a high volume of the traffic that goes backwards and forwards. But certainly for me, when I meet with other business people and people of influence who are good face to face, they leave a very marked impression on me in a different way to someone who's good online does. It seems to be a much rarer skill set.
It's a much rarer skill set, but it's going to be the one which I believe will be utterly in demand in the next couple of decades.
Why?
The line I use on stage is, in an age of automation, artificial intelligence, and robotization, stay human.
Yes.
So the point which I want people to understand is that we are becoming more disconnected from each other, counterintuitively, because we're more connected via technology, but we're actually more disconnected on a human level because it's, as we said earlier on, it's highlight reels that are being shared. It's superficial stories. It's summaries rather than in-depth conversations. People are projecting their best selves rather than their vulnerable selves, if you know what I mean. So they're not doing the human thing. And so I believe one of the core competencies, one of the core skills that you can go and develop no matter what industry you're in and what level you want to achieve within that industry. If you want to be more effective with all of your relationships, then you need to become a student of people. And that includes yourself. Understand who you are and then be authentic to that, but understand other people and adapt how you communicate with them to their preferences. So there's a number of tools for that, which we can unpack if you want to.
Yes, please.
But that's I think it's going to be the most important skill. And even on a big brand kind of corporate level, it's going to be about demonstrating values and telling stories, because that's how we're going to be connecting with people more and more. Mm-hmm. So to unpack the original bit, where communication starts, I'll tell you a couple of things. First of all, let's talk about what the communication model is, how the process of communication. So we have very, very, very easily, we have external stimuli that comes in. It can be in a number of different formats, and we'll receive that and process it through our kind of visual, auditory, kinesthetic, even through things like taste. We'll interpret the world around us in a number of different ways, but let's say mainly through our eyes, ears, and what we sense and what we feel.
Yeah.
And then what happens is we apply our normal filters. So our filters will generalize, distort, and delete. They will map that information against our own values, our social conditioning, the beliefs that we hold, and the memories that we have. We are a product of our environment. It's that whole kind of conversation around nature and nurture. I think it's, in most cases, nurture will win every single time. So we are a product of our environment. But anyway, all of those things, they basically constitute our map of reality. This was once highlighted to me quite recently, actually, where somebody had come into a friend of mine who was coaching, and she was coaching this particular client, and they said, I want to be a better communicator, a better speaker. And she said, okay, well, we need to work on your confidence. And she says, oh, no, I don't want to work on my confidence. She said, so why do you want to work on your confidence? Because I don't want to come across as arrogant. So in her map of reality, the word confidence means arrogant. And the assumption that we always make is that everybody thinks the same way that we do, or uses language in the same way that we do, or has interpreted the world around them in the same way that we have. And it's a kind of fatal mistake. So the communication model is, it comes in external stimuli, we put it through our filters, map it against our map of reality. This affects our physical state and therefore our physiology, and therefore it impacts the way we behave. That's the simple process of communication. Okay. The next thing is really around then how we internally process information. So if you can understand somebody's preference to things like visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or even those that are real logic thinkers. This is touching on some of the things that NLP will teach. If you're dealing with somebody who has a strong visual preference and you can identify that, you can use language like, do you see what I mean? Or can you see the big picture? You'll use visual language and you'd probably be a little bit more effective with them. If somebody's got an auditory preference for how they process information, it was, do you hear what I'm saying? If it's feelings, I get the feeling that, and you can use those language. How does that feel to you, for example? So the key is how you identify people's representational systems. I was
going to say, how do you determine that?
There's a number of tools, and before I give you the answer to that, because it's there's another level of complexity. I don't know if you've ever done psychometrics, Chris.
I haven't.
You've done a disc profile, something like that.
I've done Big Five, which is a personality assessment. I'm not sure if that counts.
I encourage everybody to go off and do these things, because there's always going to be a slight improvement in self-awareness that comes from it. What
would you recommend?
So DISC is the one that's best known, but there's Myers-Briggs, there's Belbin. They're all good for different contexts. DISC is the one that's really known and quite often used by other tools too. They adapt, they take the standard core of it, and they apply different learnings. The thing about these things is they'll put you into a box for the sake of overview analytics, but actually we all have adaptive behaviors too, and we all float in between different. For example, I'm a high I in DISC, which is energetic, big picture, enthusiastic, outgoing, all of those things. But actually, if I come across somebody who's very dominant and task focused and strong-willed and forceful, I'll adapt my behavior to ultra dominate them, if you know what I mean, because I don't like being dominated.
Yes.
My adaptive behavior will be to match theirs, but it will always be our adaptive behaviors are also always very true to our values. They're anchored to our values. But again, it's a thing to understand. So, for example, in a sales context, if I was going into a sales meeting and I meet somebody like me, we're going to have a bit of a laugh. We're going to have banter. We're going to be telling stories. It's talking big picture. It's going to be enthusiastic and positive. If I go in and speak to somebody who's highly analytical with a strong preference for detail, I immediately will adapt the way I'm communicating, and I'll get to the point first. I'll do the numbers, and otherwise, if I'm doing my usual thing, they'll just be thinking, "Just get on with it. What numbers? Give me the details." They'll be distracted by that. So you have to adapt the way that you speak to others to match their communication preferences.
Okay, so how are we going to determine who these people are?
So I'm going to give you two obvious methods. One obvious method and one which isn't so obvious. There's something called eye accessing cues, which I find quite useful. I use it quite a lot in my just day-to-day rapport with other people. And this is have you seen the TV series Lie to Me with Tim Roth?
Yes.
Yeah. So, of course, he uses a whole load of tools, which are psychological tools, understanding thought processes, body language, etc. Eye accessing tools is one of them. And basically, if you're speaking to somebody and where their eyes go gives you a bit of an indication into their communication preference. So imagine you're looking at somebody and their eyes go top right-hand corner. So they're top left, top right to you. That's visual recall. So they're accessing memories. If it goes to the other side, it's visual construct. That's imagination, often misused by police forces who think people are constructing alibis if they spend a lot of time there. Remember, it's not an exact science. It's just a good way of understanding a preference. So if they stay dead even but go to the left, go to the right as facing, that's auditory recall. So remembering what somebody said. To the left, it's auditory construct, imagining what somebody might say. If it goes to the bottom right-hand side, that's internal dialogue. That's probably somebody very strong, logical thinker who's actually asking themselves the question and trying to figure out what their answer is. If it's the opposite side, bottom left, that's kinesthetic, touch, taste, smell, etc. So there's somebody very connected to their feelings. And typically somebody who's a strong kinesthetic thinker will be slower in their communication because they're feeling it. So that's one example. But do you know the really simple way of understanding somebody's preference with all of these things is to listen. Honestly, it's not more complex than that. Asking really good questions and listening. You see, on top of communication and representational systems, the thing which I really go off about is context. Everybody has a context. Everybody has a set of circumstances that are really unique to them. And the only way we get to understand people's communication preferences, personality types, and their context is to ask them really good questions. They did a study where they took a chap who was flying transatlantically from New York to the UK. And this could be just an urban myth, by the way, but I've been telling the story because I heard it years ago and I thought it was cool. But this person was flying transatlantically from New York to the UK, 7 hours on the flight, and they gave him the task that you've got to keep the guy next to you talking for the whole 7 hours without revealing a single piece of information about yourself. Wow. So when they landed, they interviewed the other passenger, and they said, "How was your flight?" "It was amazing. It was really good." "What about the guy you were sat talking to?" "Oh, what a fella. Really cool guy." "What was his name?" "Couldn't tell you. Didn't have a Scooby-Doo." Hadn't given them any information at all. He'd just shown such genuine interest that this person had been made to feel like $1 million. So you have two byproducts of asking good questions and being interested in people. One is you get to learn their personality preferences, representational systems, and context. The second is they really like you because you've shown interest in them. They feel special. And so it's a double-edged sword. It works really, really well. You know, in a networking context, I meet people who are nervous about networking all the time. And, you know, networking can be daunting and there's no two ways around it. But actually, if you just get good at asking people questions and showing genuine interest in people, and it's no different from dating, Chris, is it? You know, if I knew these tools when I was 16, 17 years old.
You'd have had a much different teenage years.
Just show interest in people, you know, make them feel special by showing genuine interest. It's the key to all things.
I think you're very right. Everyone knows, everyone's got that friend who just won't shut up about what they've got going on. And no one really wants to be around them, or they tolerate them to varying degrees. But yeah, when I think about the people who I have the most connection with, it's the ones who ask questions, who ask me how I'm doing or how my day's gone or follow up something. They don't just ask a question to be polite. They take a genuine interest and then they ask again and then they ask again.
Yes, well, I'll quote Buddha. If your mouth is open, you're not learning.
Very fair point. Very fair point. So we've had a look at how we can interpret what category someone else would fall into so that they can You can gear your use of language towards that. What are the things that you can do yourself after asking questions in terms of body language, in terms of dress, in terms of eye contact, word usage? What are the things that you can do to give the best impression of yourself face to face?
So we talk about getting into rapport with somebody, and there's a number of different ways of getting into rapport. But let's start with the physiology. So rapport is that kind of that time of connection with somebody where, you're starting to build trust. So from a physiology point of view, simple things like blinking and breathing at the same pace on a subconscious level.
Is that easy to do?
Well, the key with all of these things is if you force it and you're obvious with it, it feels like manipulation, and it will have the opposite effect. It will turn somebody off.
Breaks down the fourth wall.
Yeah, but if you come in to a situation with somebody and you genuinely just want to try and be synchronized, that's a different thing altogether. In fact, the biggest way of, I'm going to tell you a few things about rapport now, but actually the biggest way of building rapport with somebody is when you're asking all of those great questions we just talked about, genuinely listen to their answer. If you're really listening to somebody, you'll naturally fall into rapport with them anyway. In fact, I was at an exhibition in London called The Best You. Big shout out to Bernardo Moya, who runs that event in London every year. And I was I was speaking there, but I had a stand as well. So I was on the stand talking to people. I was talking to this woman who's really, really skeptical about anything to do with things like rapport. And after about 10 minutes, she had kind of relaxed. She was showing more interest. And I just highlighted to her that we were stood in exactly the same pose, which was my hand was on my midsection, kind of holding the buckle of my belt. And she'd come into that same pose. And she said, well, you've just put your hands there. I've been stood this way. She was real skeptical. I said, actually, I've been stood like this for an hour. My belt broke an hour ago. I've been holding my trousers up. You've fallen into rapport with me. And, it does happen. It's because on a subconscious level, we do actually want to connect with other people. So the whole blinking and breathing thing is a nice, gentle way of doing it. The expressions on our faces, being in control of our own expressions, having a smile on our face, all of those things is easy to do, yet people don't do it. But it's got to be an authentic smile as well. So two quick things on this. I was once in an audience, speaking to an audience, and a guy in the audience had this grimace on his face the whole way through my talk. And as a speaker, I try and make eye contact with everybody. Yeah. And I immediately thought, God, this guy hates what I'm saying. And at the end of the talk, his facial expression hadn't changed. And at the end of the talk, he came up to me and he said, that was one of the best presentations I've ever heard. I thought, you have forgotten to tell your face, my friend. He utterly confused me with that response. We're in control of our expressions. So if you want to make friends with people and build rapport, then, of course, just relax into it. One of the people who didn't do this authentically, though, was previous PM Gordon Brown. So Gordon Brown, at one of the elections, was basically advised by somebody within his team to go and practice his smile. And before the cameras were turned up at one of the BBC election debates in Bristol, he stood at the lectern for about 15 minutes practicing his smile, which just didn't look natural at all. So this is where you've got to get the balance right with who you authentically are.
Yeah.
But anyway, moving on, then you've got things like the non-verbal, our gestures. So, our reptilian brains, if you approach somebody with your hands behind your back, their immediate subconscious thought is, what are you hiding? What weapon are you going to pull out and cock me over the head with? Exactly. So open body language, positive body language, but then being mindful about what different gestures mean in different countries. A quick funny, a friend of mine, Steve Clark, was speaking in Tehran. And in Tehran, one of the things, Steve's puts his thumbs up all the time. Is that all right? Yeah, as a speaker. Mm-hmm. And he'd made a point and then put his thumbs up. Now, in Iran, if you put your thumb up at somebody, you're flipping the bird. You're doing the equivalent of the bird. So you had 400 people in an audience.
Just done that to an entire auditorium.
Well, 400 people in an audience who had just flipped consistently. He carried on doing it, and their whole facial expressions changed. And he was saved by his translator, who said, he doesn't know what he's just done, in their ears. And then they started laughing, and it was rescued. But, just be mindful, but open body language, show your hands. And I'm often asked, actually, in an age of video conference calls and Skype calls where people aren't traveling as much but still wanting to connect, how can you do the same thing? So, the same thing applies. If you're going to take the eye, where I talk about image in the book, it's not just about brand. It's not just about profiles and pictures or the way that you're dressed. It's also the way you set the room you're speaking in. What's the impression? The reason I asked you for this particular thing, is it an audio or is it a video? Because if it was video, I'd have done it somewhere else. Because I'd have been mindful of the scene that we set as well. And the thing about a Skype call is you can still show your hands. You can still make eye contact by looking directly into the camera. The moment you start getting distracted and reading emails and not giving your attention to the person you're talking to, then you're going to lose some of that ability to influence.
It's interesting that the principles of face-to-face communication occur even when the other face is coming through a screen.
Absolutely. So I always minimize the picture of the other person and put it right up by the camera. So I'm watching their face, but my eyes are looking into their eyys.
That's a really good little tip, isn't it?
Again, I think it's important. We've got to, if we're going to adapt the way that we behave and communicate to technology, then we still have to use it and apply the old principles. That's the point of the book, really. So the nonverbal includes posture. You'll have heard people doing power poses and closed body language, arms folded, etc. But don't read too much into these things all the time. Unlike you, Chris, I've seen your pictures. I know you are mind, body, soul, fitness fanatic. I'm a overweight mid-40s guy. So sometimes
good on Xbox though.
Good on Xbox, but sometimes I fold my arms because it's comfortable. I've got a little belly I can rest my arms on. So it's different horses for different courses. You may have even seen recently where a load of the Tory MPs have been stood in power poses with their legs far too far apart. They look like aging Power Rangers.
No, I haven't seen this.
So, again, to be avoided. And, eye contact, common sense, little and often. If you intensely stare into somebody's eyes constantly, you're going to freak them out. So use it when you're being sincere. In fact, for me, when I'm talking to somebody, I look into their eyes. When I'm listening to somebody, I watch their mouth.
Is that a fairly good rule of thumb to use?
It's just the way I do it, I know that if there's background noise and things, if I'm watching somebody's mouth, I'm really taking in what they're saying. I'm concentrated on the words, and I'm receiving the words in more than one way. But if I'm talking to them, I'm looking into their eyes and showing I'm not hiding behind anything. The moment you start looking away when you're actually talking, that could breed a lack of trust.
I do find it sometimes very difficult. I work quite hard on maintaining eye contact, especially having read the book. But the hitting that Goldilocks zone of not too much to look like you want to fight, but enough to show that you're engaged. There's still a question mark, I guess, that hangs over with regards to that sometimes.
Well, the easy thing is, if you're in control of all the other assets you have, i.e. you're smiling, very rare do people look for a fight with a smile on the face. True. So it's just combining the lot, but and enough for them to know that you're actually involved in that conversation with them and not distracted about what's going on over their shoulders is the thing. And then from nonverbal, I'd come on to voice. So with voice, there's a whole load of things that we can do. Our pacing, our volume, the language that we use, the tone that we use, the different intonations that we use. So, if I go and meet somebody, for example, particularly for the first time, and they're all frantic and stressed, I might match that intensity initially, but then I'll slow myself down and slow them down with me. So by the time we finish, they're nice and relaxed and we're in rapport and we're having a conversation and everybody's been calmed down. But if I go in and start trying to be too calm initially, I might not get into rapport with them as quickly because subconsciously I'm not just like them. Equally, if I'm stressed and manic because I'm late for a meeting and I come in and somebody's all calm and relaxed, the first thing I'm doing is giving myself a sanity check and by taking a breath and slowing down my communication.
Yeah.
So that, little things like that are nice and easy. And language is easy. Language is around the words that we use. Compliments are free, but just make them genuine. Because if you just start saying nice things for the sake of it, it comes across as insincere. So, if you're in a job that's in somebody's, you find yourself in people's homes, or if you go into somebody's office and they've got a picture of their family, ask questions, but say, that's a lovely family you got there, or this is a lovely home you have, or whatever the compliment is, just mean it. So little things like that help. But language can get more complex. So with NLP, language patterns are an important part of it, and embedded commands are an important part of that. A very skilled politician who used to do that, in my opinion, was Tony Blair. Regardless of whether we agree with his politics, he was very skilled at using language. He would say something like, you, like me, believe it's important for us to have a robust economy. Well, the embedded command there is, you like me. Whatever he said beyond that, he was basically saying, you, like me, believe. And the you like me was with enough pause and for the command to actually sink in on a subconscious level.
I'd never even noticed that, but I can literally picture that. I can picture him saying that and pointing at the screen.
He was clearly trained in things like NLP. The way his body language, the way he sometimes you could see through it, but actually most of the time he did it very naturally. So he's clearly been trained, or he was just a very natural at it. But remember, NLP in itself, its origins come from modeling the behavior of people who are good at what they do.
Yeah, it's trying to recreate someone who naturally has that good rapport building, I suppose. Are there any other NLP tricks or solutions that people can implement? Obviously, hopefully not ones that are going to be too conceited or spurious, but yeah, ones that people could use to assist them when they're trying to build rapport.
Well, think about what we've covered so far. So we've covered rapport from a physiology point of view, from a non-verbal point of view, and from a voice point of view. One of the things which I think people should, in fact, we've already said it today, I'm going to repeat it because I think it's important. It's around connection on a human level. So demonstrating your values. There's a reason why, with my acronym in the book, the Y is around you and it's around values and the character traits that you display. I believe it's important to wear those values on your sleeve. I used to have a business card, actually. On the back of the business card, it had all the words that defined me. So, West Ham United, skiing, family, kids, father, guitar, whatever. The words which floated my boat. And what would happen is people typically, if you exchange a business card in a meeting or a networking event, they'll turn the card over and immediately the conversation will be people orientated on one of those subjects rather than actually just trying to be formal and businesslike. And it made the rest of the meeting so much easier because we got to relate on a human level rather than actually trying to talk business straight away.
I understand.
So that whole connection thing with other people can come from a number of different ways. It can come because you've shown interest. It can come because you've been able to wear your heart on your sleeve, your values on your sleeve. I'll give you an example of this, actually. This is a few years back, but when my kids were younger, we were coming back from Euro Disney on the train. And my wife's an introvert, so she just wanted to put her head into a book and read and relax and re-energize by having her alone time, which is how introverts re-energize, and extroverts like me, we re-energize by throwing ourselves into groups of people, So in this particular case, she wanted to read a book. I was entertaining the kids. And before you knew it, I started to attract other people's children. I know that sounds wrong, but from the point of view, card games, drawing, entertainment, whatever. So I suddenly had a little audience, and I looked after these kids on the way coming into London. And about 20 minutes outside of a London train station, one of the other dads said, "I'm intrigued. What is it you do?" And we had a conversation which resulted in business a couple of weeks later.
No way.
He saw my values. He could see how I was coming across. He could see what I was like with my own children. He could see I was generous enough to give time and attention to other people's kids. The values were plain and simple and clear. And, that just made the rest of the conversation nice and easy. And, when we talk about things like serendipity not being a strategy, serendipity is effective if it's still not a strategy, but it's still effective if you can make the most of opportunities because you come across in the right way. And actually, if you've got things front of mind, one of my favorite sayings is opportunity dances with those already on the dance floor.
Yeah.
Which I think is about, translated, is just about having your wants, needs, desires front of mind. If you remind yourself on a regular basis what you're looking for, you're more likely to spot it. Is
it luck equals preparedness plus opportunity?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, is it really serendipity? But then, the very last thing which I'll give you, just on this influencing face to face, is rather than approaching conversations in the transactional way, you tell me something, I'm going to tell you something. You tell me something, I'm going to tell you something, and it's going to serve a purpose.
Becomes like a game of tennis, right?
Absolutely. Start telling stories. I believe one of the core competencies of big brands, small brands, personal brands alike for the next decade or so is going to be your ability to tell your stories, which demonstrate your values, which connect on a human level. So get great at storytelling.
I'll tell you what's a really good example of that is how successful John Lewis have been with their Christmas commercials. Amazingly
so. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're drawing people in on a subject rather than just saying, this is what we've got on the shelves and this is the price we're selling at. It's about storytelling. It's no different in face-to-face conversations. And if you think about this conversation we've had so far, we've told stories of Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, we've told stories of Euro Disney, we've told stories of Jack Black, Judy Nail. We've told stories of business cards, of people with different psychometric profiles, of millennials. It's all about storytelling.
I understand completely. So I think we've got a good understanding of what people can do face to face there. What are the other principles of influence that you think that we haven't covered so far, which are pertinent for people to understand?
So in the book, I break everything down into an acronym called PICKY, and that's mainly because it's in the rule book for speakers or writers that you've got to have an acronym. Yeah, you're not allowed to do it otherwise. So I'll just quickly run through the acronym, and it'll just give an idea of the bigger picture. So P is around people, and so we've touched on it with how we connect with influencers, but it's not necessarily just influencers that bring us opportunities, knowledge, wisdom, critical feedback, etc. It's our networks, and I'd encourage anybody who is listening to this to start taking their networking a little bit more seriously. That doesn't necessarily mean going to breakfast networking events. It means just being a bit more focused on building your sphere of influence, the relationships that you have, the people that you would know and who would know you.
What is it that you say in the book? It's not who you know or what you know, it's who knows. It's also who knows you.
100%. I take this quite seriously. I run a skiing trip every year called Net Ski. In fact, we're about 13 years old now. So we take a bunch of business people. I think the biggest group we've done was nearly 70. A bunch of business people to a resort, typically in Europe. And of course, they're bonding over a shared experience. They're not sales pitching to each other. Nobody's immediately bringing business cards to dinner on an evening. They're having a glass of wine, working hard in the day, laughing at the mistakes, high-fiving over the triumphs, and it's a shared experience. They're connecting on a human level. And let me tell you, more business gets done on that trip and afterwards than any other networking event I've ever seen.
Yeah, I bet it does. I think jumping back to what you'd said previously about the storytelling, that it's strange, isn't it, that really effective outcomes from a commercial perspective, in quotation marks, are elicited by not focusing on that at all, by focusing on the values and focusing on the story. And yeah, I definitely can see some parallels in my business life with that.
And I would say, I don't know where your audience is geographically, but if you've just heard that and thought, hey, I want to be a part of it, I'm going to shamelessly plug. It's net-ski.co.uk.
When's the next one?
Well, we've got 2 trips next year. We're doing Team in January and we're doing Aspen in March. So we have there's not many places left for Team, but we do have the option of taking the chalet next door. But my point is, it's a really good trip because people, all of that travel time, all of that time on chairlifts, all of the sneaky beers or van show you have, in between runs, those experiences. That's the bits where people bond, and then take that to another level. I'm a huge fan of masterminding. Are you part of a mastermind, Chris?
No.
Have you heard of it as a concept?
I would like it elaborated. I have, but I wouldn't be able to recite it to you.
Okay, so I first was introduced to masterminds when I was probably about 18, 19 years old, and it was Christmas Eve. I was in a pub in Wiltshire, and I was just stood with one of my best mates and his dad. And his dad's a millionaire business owner, and we were doing all of our kind of young spouting shit as young people do, as I did anyway. And he said, well, if you're really ambitious, Warren, he said, you'll, it's a book I recommend. And it was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And he said, I could lend you my copy, but if you're hungry enough, you'll go and buy your own. And of course, wanting to be seen as hungry, I think I had it by Boxing Day. But there was a chapter in there around masterminding, which I thought, this is really, really powerful, impressive. And it's the simple concept of bringing some really good people together on a fairly regular basis. That could be monthly or every 2 months, and actually being that kind of sounding board for each other, being the like the board of directors for each other. It's if you've got an idea, they're your incubator. If you've got an issue you're dealing with, a colleague at work, a fellow director, a member of staff, whatever, or even at home, they're your critical feedback. They listen and will come in with a different perspective.
Okay.
If you're creating commercial opportunities, they may be JV partners potentially, or they may have the context to make it happen. But it's that sitting down for a period of time with a bunch of people you respect and value their opinion, and being open and honest enough and vulnerable enough to share. And there's 2 rules to it. One is Chatham House rules. So whatever's said in that environment stays in that environment. You don't go talking behind each other's back. Trust is absolutely important for it to work. Mm-hmm. But the second thing that really happens is accountability. So if you're with a bunch of people and you say, right, I'm going to go and do this by next month, you don't want to turn up next month having not done it. So that accountability means that you get things done. Mm. Now, there are organizations out there you can go and spend lots of money on masterminding. Vistage is one of the bigger ones. There's the Academy of Chief Execs and loads of others. But, it can cost anything up to £1,000 a month to be part of these groups. And I have paid that much in the past. But actually, you can equally go and invite a bunch of people you like to the pub once a month and just have dinner together and have that same conversation. Mm. It doesn't have to cost. I've currently got a really nice mastermind group. It's we've kept it to 5 for now, but for me, it's an essential part of running a business or building a personal brand. Collaborations and all sorts of things come out of it, but it's a group of people that you really trust to get dynamite advice. So that's taking networking to a bigger level. It's, don't just see it as a kind of transactional business breakfast type thing. See it about building the human relationships. But then if you can find that kind of core group of people that you really value the opinion of, start meeting them on a more intimate setting and bring your issues to the table. Yeah,
when you find someone who can add a little bit of value, don't let them go.
Absolutely.
Get a hold of them and try and meet them as regularly as possible. So we've got people. What's I?
P for people. I is around image. So we touched on it before, but it's the way we present ourselves. It's the way the clothes we wear. It's the way that we dress our profile pages on social media. It astounds me that I still see people who've got profile pictures from 20, 30 years ago and they've lost all their hair since then, or whatever the thing is. Again, it's got to be authentic. If I turn up on my wife won't let me go on dating sites, but if I was to turn up on a dating site and somebody turns up and their picture's 20 years out of date, what does that tell me from a trust point of view?
Yeah.
It means that they hide, and the same is true in business. If you try and portray an image that's not you, actually immediately makes people more skeptical of you anyway. So image is about all of those things. It's consideration to the language that we use, the words that we use on our copy on our websites, on our business cards, on our sales literature, on our email marketing, our newsletters, etc. Image is around the kind of values that we want to portray. Communication is the C, and that's around how we have conversations, again, both written and our language face to face. And for me, a big key part of that is being consistent. I see people on social media, for example, safely behind a monitor and a keyboard in another county, say things that they wouldn't dream of saying if they were staring into the whites of somebody's eyes.
Agreed.
And again, I think it's really important to be consistent and just have that filter that says, would I say this if I was staring into their eyes right now? If I wouldn't, then don't write it. Little things like that.
That's a lovely rule of thumb that I wish most of the internet would listen to.
Unfortunately, they won't make me god of the internet, so I can't do anything about it.
We can only hope, Warren.
God help the world. Yeah. K is around knowledge, and that's a simple thing around demonstrating expertise. So if we were looking to breed trust with somebody, they want to know that we know what we're talking about. So how do we demonstrate our expertise? How do we share our knowledge? How do we leverage all of those all of the principles that we've talked about today? And again, there's multiple channels open to us, but I really encourage people to get out of their comfort zones and stand up and public speak. If it's in you, if you think it's possibly in you, standing up and actually speaking to your peers is one of the most powerful ways to breed authority. And then lastly, we've touched on it already, is the why, which is around the values that we hold. And in the book, I explore a load of values which I identified in the people that have influenced me. And again, just in the interest of modeling, having identified them, I gave them great thought and thought, how can I start to adopt these values? How can I certainly demonstrate those values? So really simple. If you break down everything that we've said, there's nothing that isn't common sense in there. But unfortunately, common sense isn't common practice.
No, it's not. It's I don't know why. I don't know why people get flustered, I guess I want to say, especially face to face, but also online. People have a tendency to not put themselves across in the best way, and the remembered self from the situation that, I could have said that, I should have said this. It's not due to a lack of cognitive ability. It's not that they're not quick enough face to face or online to be able to get this information out. There just seems to be, is it nervousness? Is it a lack of experience or a lack of preparedness to be truthful or vulnerable online? I'm not really too sure. I don't know if you have a common stumbling blocks that people have that are fundamental to them not eliciting the best influence that they can.
Well, I think you hit on a couple there. Certainly, they get in their own way. Is what I would say. If you've come into a room and your mind, for example, a networking room, and your mind's on other things, the 3 jobs that you should have done on your to-do list that didn't get done, the fact you've, you don't feel $1 million, you haven't had a chance to do your makeup, or maybe you're not wearing what you wanted to wear, but you're nervous about how you're going to come across because of the baggage you carry around about how people portray you. If you come in with all of that baggage, any of it, you're not making your best first impression. You really have to leave the world at the door in any kind of relationship. Leave the world at the door and just focus on the conversation. From conversations come opportunities.
It's a lovely way to put it. So I think we've got through a really nice model of how people can improve their ability to influence, going from understanding their why, understanding their audience, understanding the mediums and the medias that they can contact them through, the credibility through association, the face-to-face, the online approaches that people can use. And you've given us some really lovely examples. Are there any other points that you think people need to hear before we round this conversation off?
So there's only a couple of quotes which will just provoke a bit of thought, and this because ultimately, actually, you've summarised building personal brand, etc. Actually, I think the kind of key messages, if I was to summarize the conversation we've just had, Chris, is first of all, we discussed the world is changing, so become that student of change. Second of all, we talked about becoming a student of people. So that's understanding them, understand their context, their communication preferences, their personality traits. Yeah, be that student of people, and that includes being a student of yourself. We talked about listening as one of the most effective tools when it comes to influencing, because it gives you context, but it also makes you liked. Then connecting on a human level, it's not all about business. Give a bit of yourself. That's what people, hearts and minds are what people connect to. Demonstrate your values, tell your stories. I think that's enough for anybody listening to this to be able to do something meaningful.
If you stick to those, you won't go too far wrong, right?
I can't see how you can. But all of this, as I say, there's a number of quotes, but the key to successful leadership today is influence, not authority. It's Ken Blanchard. That's one that's on my website. Your circle of influence dictates your path. Example is not the main thing when it comes to influencing others. It's the only thing. All of these are hopefully things that anybody listening to this will just understand that whatever their objectives in life, a happier marriage, a better relationship with their kids, stronger friendships, more cordial working environments with colleagues, more clients when it comes to sales and marketing. It's all about influencing, and the better they are at these things, the more effective they'll be in all of those areas of their life. We are hugely empathetic creatures. They've even done research where they've had people, two people in fMRI scans, one listening, one talking. They couldn't see each other. And in an instant, their brain waves start to synchronize, to the point where it's almost predictive from the listener. That's how empathetic we are. We want to connect with others. So just use all of those things to build connection and be human. Remember what I said earlier on, in an age of AI and automation and robotization, it's important to stay human.
Fantastic. I've absolutely loved today, Warren. I'm glad it's been a long time coming for me to get you on. I'm really, really glad that I have done. So obviously the link to Influence the book will be in the show notes. You're a superstar. Are there any other resources, either yours or anyone else's, books or online blogs, or where do you go, or where would you advise people who want to further their knowledge into this field? Where should they look?
Well, of course, the Modern Wisdom podcast is a good starting point for anybody listening. And like everything else, it's important to share it so you get the audience you deserve. So,
agreed.
The same is true for the book. If you like the book, if anybody reads it and likes it, give us a shout out. I'd love to hear what nuggets you took from it on social media. In fact, that's how we connected, Chris.
Exactly. It's
lovely when it happens. So if people do read it, on my website, there's a strategy guide, which is basically a PDF. You see at the end of every chapter in the book, I ask a couple of questions to help people contextualize what I've just said and relate it to their own circumstances. Well,
I've filled mine in. Mine is
superb. Well, do you know why that's music to my ears? Because, what I said to you earlier on about ego versus affecting change or inspiring change in others. When people actually write something down, that builds intention. It means that they're going to go and implement something. If they implement something, they're only going to have some sort of positive effect that comes off the back of it. So I love the messages I get on social media from people that say, right, this particular point has resulted in this, or an improved relationship here.
Couldn't agree more. I've just finished a podcast with Dr. Ewan Lawson, and during that we discussed gratitude journaling, and exactly the same thing there. It's writing down an intention. It's one of the reasons that I love the podcasting platform, because it forces me, under duress of a very, very skeptical audience sometimes, to crystallize my thoughts into a way that has to be both truthful and make sense. A lot of the time when it's just thoughts floating around in your mind, they're these unhewn sort of globules of idea, and then as soon as you have to verbalize it or write it down, it takes form in a very, very different way. And I think that you can start to be very rigorous at assessing your own stance on things that you might have previously taken for granted or not really understood. And then when you do get to writing things down, so I couldn't agree more. So we've got influence, we've got the partner worksheet that you can download on your website, which will also be in the show notes. Is there anything else that people should be reading?
So in terms of other books, there's a load out there. I'm a fan of Daniel Priestley. Go and have a look at some of his work. Entrepreneur Revolution is a good one. Have a look at Cialdini's follow-up book to Psychology of Persuasion, which is called Persuasion.
Persuasion seems to be pretty heavily touted at the moment. It's one that I haven't read, but it's if you'd given it I'd said to myself, if you gave it your seal of approval during this podcast, that I would go and get it. So I think that's just locked in my next Audible credit usage, I think.
Oh, there you go. No, well, that's a good use for it. Cialdini comes from a very strong academic background with his work, but no, it's a good book. And a lot of the books that I've really valued over the years aren't necessarily sort of mainstream now. I loved one called Richest Man in Babylon, which is a story around actually what building a business or what building wealth actually looks like, but it's told in an old tongue kind of story. Very good. Bearing in mind the biggest thing that we talked about today was at the beginning was around change. Go and read Who Moved My Cheese? A simple book that can be read in an hour, but just tells the story of mice and men and illustrates why it's actually important to be constantly moving and not wedded to your current situation, your current circumstances. Everything's changing around you. You need to change with it. So there are a couple of books I absolutely recommend.
Fantastic. Warren, where can the listeners find you online?
At Warren Cass or warrencass.com.
Fantastic. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm very, very glad that we got to delve into the world of influence. The book is currently about a quarter of the way through. I think my third read through now, and it's definitely such an applicable subject field that, as you say, the applications of it go from professional to personal to absolutely everything. And I think that being a student of people, as you've said, is something that we all probably can endeavour to try and do a little bit more, and we'll reap some benefits from as we do.
I'm thrilled you've got so much from it, Chris, and I really appreciate the invitation to come and speak on the podcast. And I look forward to the up and coming next episode, the Gratitude Journal. That sounds fascinating.
Thank you very much, Warren. Thank you for your time.
Take care, buddy. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Bye bye.